I'm here with my old friend Stephen, who I've known for many years. And Stephen is a baker, a singer-songwriter, and a philosopher, I would say. And we've been having this very long conversation over extended time and influencing each other in various ways. And I wanted to have a conversation because I think Stephen has a few things to say. So we were just talking off mic, and you were telling me that there was something particular you wanted to say, and related to, let's say, some of the discussions that have been going on about religion and about Jordan Peterson, about the intellectual dark web, and some of the ideas that are in the air today. So, speak, Stephen. Tell me, what is it that you have to say to us?
First of all, hello, Andrew, even though we just spoke. Well, I want to talk about small groups. First of all, 20 years ago, I read René Girard, who shocked me into realizing that there was no such thing as collective intelligence, and that we had to figure out. And I knew I was on the political left, and I embarked on a process of trying to figure out how we were to optimize well-being for the so-called lower class, or people who don't necessarily fit into the world of success, and that was it was a very long journey, and it was a very confusing one. But I came up with this idea about 10 years ago now, which was that it was a sort of an idea of democratic reform. And so you'll have to sort of bear with me for a minute. Imagine election day is on May the 2nd, and it's November, so election day is in 6 months' time. And you have as a task to form a small group. So you may form a small group with people you already know, or may be with people you've never met before. And you get to know them, you talk, you agree and you disagree, you might hang out, play darts or whatever, or watch sports games on television or whatever, just get to know each other. And you know that on election day you have one task, and that is to choose a leader out of that small group. So the group is small enough so that each member of the group knows the other member personally. And so that's a pretty small group, actually. My feeling is that once you get above, 8 or 9, it just gets too big. And people have a tendency to split a group into two and to not make an effort to get to know everybody in the group.
Okay, so I've been thinking about this as well. And I think you can see this in, in all kinds of different models, like a football game or a rock concert, or you have a small group, and this small group is dynamic. And everybody is in relation to each other in a real way, rather than an abstract way. And if it gets bigger than that, then it's ungovernable does that make any sense?
Oh, absolutely. Like I've imagined like a big arena where some sporting event has happened, 50,000 people in an arena. My feeling is that the arena is full of small groups. And so 50,000 people kind of doesn't make sense. And often it falls into stupid collective behavior, like mobs and hooliganism and stuff like that. But when it's coherent, it's basically a bunch of small groups going to see a match. And so there's actually this deep coherency inside this large crowd. And there's a potential for that large crowd to actually relate as small groups to other small groups. And we have this intuition for behaving in that way, and we tend to. But I'm skipping off. I'd like to get to that later. That's a more complex thing. But anyway, so it's election day is coming up, and you have one task, and that's to choose a leader. And what happens is the level 1 election has just occurred, and so level 1 leadership. Let's say, for argument's sake, and just for mathematical simplicity, that the groups have to have 10 members. So you've just chosen leader. Everybody in your society on election day has just chosen a level 1 leader. And that means that since the group has 10 members, that means that 90% of the population has just made their only, 90% of the electorate, those who vote, have just made their only vote. And what happens is, this is only in my imagination, it doesn't exist anywhere, the level 1 leaders move up to the level 2 and then form another small group of 10. And they have an extended period of time. They have to form a small group, got to get to know each other, argue, agree and disagree. And their whole purpose after a certain period of time on level 2 election day is to choose a leader of that small group, and so on and so forth. So level 3 leaders, so a level 2 leader represents 100 people, level 3 is 1,000, and level 6 represents 1,000,000, etc. And so when you think about it, if you think in terms of groups of 10, it only takes 10 levels to represent the entire planet. And you know, probably even less, because not everybody votes. You know, a lot of kids don't vote and other people don't vote. But anyway,
so can I just stop you for a sec so I understand? So you're talking about reorganizing democracy based on small groups in some sense.
Right. But not only that, it starts at the bottom, and it's a vision for optimizing the enfranchisement. In other words, optimizing the voice of everybody, so that everybody who votes for someone they know personally, and nobody ever votes for someone that they don't know personally. It's always an interpersonal vote. Now, it's still a secretive vote, you know, because, you know, there's often serious conflict inside these groups. You know, it can be very, there can be a lot of tension, a lot of disagreement inside these groups, especially at the higher levels, I'm thinking, because people are really at these, you know, disagree very strongly about things. But anyway, so it was an idea for optimizing enfranchisement. In other words, giving everybody a voice, so that everybody votes, and they always vote for someone they know personally, so they really feel that their vote is valuable, and they really feel that it counts. Now, they only vote once. This will be another part of my little vision. So you only vote for your level 1 leader. Then at level 5 or level 6 might be the mayor of your city, for example. And level 7 might be the leader of, you know, I'm in Canada, so the premier of your province, you know, the region of your country. And, you know, a few levels higher up, it would be the prime minister, you know, and that kind of thing. Or, you know, and so you only vote once, but you see that certain levels represent different jurisdictions, political jurisdictions. Anyway, this was just
So just let me stop you there. Maybe this would be easier to understand if we talked about the problematic, right, of how the system is today. Like, why is the system not working today, and why are you're offering this alternate model? What are you criticizing in the system as it is today in order to offer this model? Is it the lack of, let's say, I guess this whole problem that of people being left behind, or not having a voice, or being, let's say, a vote becomes something so abstract that it doesn't mean anything, and people become completely cynical about their society? Or is it something like that?
I think all of Western democracies right now are heading towards oligarchies, which means that there's an elite group that more or less remain this elite group. They're in, you know, the big corporations are in bed basically with politicians, and there's this exclusive group who run things, and it's very difficult if you're not inside that group to access it. And there's sort of a privilege, and I think we have over the last few decades developed a deep resentment over this, and I think the ultimate reason this has happened is after beginning in, I think, in the 1940s, and, you know, really beginning early in the 20th century, the unions became increasingly powerful. By the time the 50s arrived, they were established, and there was a period of where we had a sense that the lower classes had a voice through I think primarily through the union. But the union was basically broken in the 1980s, I think, by Reaganism, and it was even broken more progressively by globalization in the 1990s, it seems to me. And so people have had this sense of economic vulnerability ever since. So that's what got me thinking about it.
Right. So that's saying that there needs to be a strong voice on the left, which is sort of, when you hear Peterson, you get the impression that, oh, we need to reinstate hierarchies or something, and hierarchies are important, and we have to go back to hierarchies and respect hierarchies, or respect the balance at least between chaos and order in the society. Whereas you're saying something different. You're actually trying to, let's say, valorize the left-wing politics in a way that is different from the left wing now, which is all identity politics and let's say resentment politics and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Well, the small group circumvents identity politics because we have to get along with the people in the group, and we have to choose a leader, and the leader moves on ahead, and we do so. I mean, I'm not saying it's not foolproof. It's probably corruptible. And it's only in my imagination. I want to insist that this only exists as an ideal. And the reason why I wanted to introduce it, because it actually accessed me to a larger sense of understanding of how the world works. But anyway, back to when you mentioned Jordan Peterson, I think his view on how, I don't think he thinks we should return to hierarchies. I think he thinks hierarchies are just something very basic to us, and we
that's right.
He's not proposing hierarchies. He's simply saying.
Well, the left sort of feels like he's valorizing hierarchies, and they hate that because hierarchies, in their opinion, are the root of all evil, right? And hierarchies can be extremely evil, obviously, but he's saying they're deep, they're part of the structure even of our brain, right? So we're going to have to work within the hierarchies to solve these problems. So we can't just do away with them, right?
Okay, so given that I've accepted that Peterson's argument that hierarchies are inevitable, then what do we do? What does the left do with them? And so
that's the question.
What the left does with them is figure out a way for people at the bottom of those hierarchies to have a voice, and so
that's exactly right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so it seems to me that what I just articulated, at least in ideal form. Now, when the problem with ideals, it's the same problem with utopianism. If you try it, it just might be an absolute disaster. So I know damn well that this only exists as an ideal, and if it is to be tried, it can only be tried in small pilot projects.
Well, on one hand, it's an ideal, but on the other hand, it's also perhaps a return to forms which are quite old.
Exactly.
Well, for example, a church is a very small group of people. It's not a big group of people. So everybody knows each other, and, they shake hands in church. There's an insistence that there's a relationship between the people in the church, right? And when it gets too big, it loses its soul, so to speak. Like it loses its, meaning and identity. So I think probably if there's something true in what you're saying, there's probably some deep, structures which mirror that. Does that make any sense?
Well, that's exactly. I just wanted to get onto that, and you basically anticipated what I was going to talk about. So I was really excited about this as a vision of economic reform, and then I stopped thinking about it, and it disappeared from my mind, and probably for a long time, maybe a couple of years, something like that. And then I had this other idea. I own a business. I have a bakery, and I had at the time, I think, 7 employees. And I remember I was working one night, and I was thinking, gee, if I had any more employees than this, I probably couldn't manage it. Now that's just me. I think someone with more practical skills, someone who's more practical in his personal would probably handle a bigger place, but not me. And then I had this moment of this insight, which is that businesses run in small groups. And so the reason why I couldn't imagine myself running a business with more than 7 employees, because that's a small group. It's an interpersonal group. Mm-hmm. And if I was to get any bigger, it would have to divide in 2. I'd have to hire a manager, that kind of thing. In other words, it had to be 2 levels. But instead, there's just basically 1 level, and basically running. And then I realized that a business is a form of private property, and property is essentially not really managed by an individual, but by groups. And then it hit me that the whole world has only ever run in small groups. I started thinking then about the kings of the past, and the king even going way back into prehistory, and I'm only imagining this, so I'm not saying that this is fact. This is only but imagine the alpha male of a tribe. He's driven to be in control.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how does he exercise control of a given tribe? Well, what he does is he first of all he demonstrates his dominance inside the tribe, but he also picks out in the tribe other dominant alphas, picks them out, and he exhibits to them that he is dominant over them, but he only picks out a small group. Yeah. In other words, he chooses a small group just under him so that he can control the small group, and that's all he needs to do, because what they in turn do is they do the exact same thing. They choose another small group just beneath them, and they control that small group. So the world has only ever run in small groups, and it has probably only ever run from the top for a time immemorial.
Well, I was talking with this guy, Tom Armnack, about the intellectual dark web, and they're a small group. And he was saying that he was talking about artistic movements, and each artistic movement is always a small group. Like anything in culture, that anything that is new or added to the culture always begins, it seems, with the small group, right? And
if it gets too big, it divides into two.
What's that?
If the group gets too big, it divides into two.
It divides and it gets watered down, and it loses its original force. But there's always these original guys in the beginning who started the whole thing, like the beatniks, or the people in the 20s in Paris, or any kind of any kind of movement is always, it's always a few guys, right? It's always
absolutely.
So even while we're talking, me and you, and I'm in communication with other people. In a sense, we're forming sort of groups of people with similar ideas. We're doing that right now, and the main group might be Peterson and his gang, and then there's all these little subgroups developing around them, and because of this revolution, and with a whole new set of information.
Absolutely, no. That's and the thing about small groups is there are disagreements within small groups, and they have to work them out. And also, I believe that every small group, once it really becomes, once it develops a strong identity, you develop an intuition for who the leader of it is. And the importance of that is the leader has the power to override the small group. And if it's just a bunch of people who agree and disagree, it's not consensual. Put it that way. And this I think is it's something very basic to the human condition, which is that small groups have leaders, and the members of the small group, they express themselves, and they may express strong disagreement with the leader, but the leader still overrides. And if someone who disagrees too strongly, then that person is at risk of leaving the group. So there's a kind of what holds the group together in many ways is the knowledge of that it has a leader. Mm-hmm. I think.
So let's look at the intellectual dark web as a sort of test model. You have Peterson; he's obviously the leader, right? In the sense that he's the most powerful of the group, and then all the other guys have different. Often they radically disagree with them. They have different points of view, but they're all kind of a group, right? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. And then if you get a guy like Sam Harris, maybe who's an atheist, and he's supposed to be part of the group, but he's not really part of the group because he wants to be a leader himself, and he has his own ideas, which are much, and he won't adhere to the conversation fully, even though he's sort of a pseudo member of the group. Or does that make sense? So there's an organic leader, but there isn't necessarily a dominant leader. There isn't this dominant idea doesn't really work. It's more like the leader isn't an alpha. The leader is the guy who can deal with all the other guys. I think an alpha leader might get killed, right? Because everybody might gang up against him, and he might be kicked out of the tribe.
Yeah, like what Peterson says about the chimpanzees. No, I agree with all that. But also, let's not forget that we've been slowly developing democracy. So we have a deeper democratic sense of how a small group should run. So we're in this evolutionary, we're evolving, we're in this historical process where we're striving to make democracy work better. And it seems to me whether or not what I just articulated is right, that nonetheless the small group is the way around collective stupidity, and collective stupidity seems to always end up, or collective identity seems to always end up pointing fingers at people. In other words, those who are not one of us are something that you need to blame for or whatever.
Like searching for a scapegoat. We're back to Girard again, right?
Exactly. And so we have to. How do we avoid that? And how do we rise above our collective identities? And it seems to me that's anyway for me. That's the way that I've found. So, and I'm sort of pretty excited by that. In other words, we can probably institute this and think and sort of understand it more deeply. And I'm sure there will be all kinds of problems and it'll be corruptible.
Well, is it being instituted or organically through new technology?
That's a real good question. I mean, I do think that we have an intuition for a small. I really think that everybody has, and like I say, in groups of friends, when groups of friends become too big, when you have a group of 15 friends and it just automatically splits into two. And what happens is people feel like it's not interpersonal enough. And this is something I wanted to say. It got me thinking about what it means to be a person. And I think arguably what it means to be a person is to be interpersonal. So the making of a person is an interpersonal process. Now, this, I think, I've been playing with the idea that this is the female counterpart of individualism, which is arguably derivative of sovereignty, which is, quintessentially male in its origins. Mm-hmm. So we have individualism there's individualism is male, and personhood or personalism, if you will, is female. They're two sides of the same thing. Mm-hmm. And personalism seems to me really is much more aware of the interpersonal dimension of becoming a person.
Interesting. Well, that's great, because that's kind of what I've always, Peterson is insisting on individual sovereignty all the time. He's saying individual sovereignty, and you almost can't get past that conversation with him. And then you want to say groups, but you don't want groups he always views in a negative light, even though he himself is dependent on certain, on his group, right? He made his name based on, going to certain guys and creating this kind of group, and the group sustains him, but he's so that you could say there's a codependence between the group and the individual, right? So the individual can't be the individual without his small group, right? He's fragmented. Is that what you mean? He's
absolutely
he's isolated. He's without his group, right? Without our group.
No, I agree completely, and I'm also inclined to think that the more you go, the lower you go in a hierarchy, the more it's useful to think in terms of persons. But the higher you get into a hierarchy, the more it's more articulate to think in terms of individuals. So at the highest level, you have these people. First of all, they're not up there on some level. They got their shit together, and so that doesn't mean they're not sinners.
Can you explain that? I'm not that clear about that. Why are the people in the lower hierarchy persons and the people higher on the hierarchy individuals?
Well, let's take, for example, children. Children don't become persons. They don't become, a whole human beings as adults unless they're supported by all these people, these groups, the people around them. And so it's an interpersonal process of becoming a person. And this is more or less obvious.
Becoming an ego in Newman's terms, as society develops and the ego kind of develops, right? You develop an ego, right? Uh-huh. He says the ego develops, we can only have rationality and science and all these things when the ego has developed, when the person can become reflective enough to otherwise we're just part of we're just part of this collectivity, a collective mind, right?
My feeling is that exists in degrees. And so the ego is a variation on the individual, but it's also a variation on the person. Mm-hmm. And so since there are many levels, if you think of small groups and you think of like I just talked about my democratic hierarchy, there's many levels, and with each level you are individuating more and more, and so we have this, and it's also, I think, in terms of human development, it's very difficult to move from one level to the next, which is why we often there's a lot of fear and suffering and stuff when we're transferring to another level.
Periods of
When we're rising.
transition, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the reason is they have different languages. They're actually different cultures. So at the very highest level, I was just thinking about.
Well, that's kind of the integral. You don't know much about the integral model, but the integral model is that you move from orange to blue to green. Or it's blue to orange to green. You move from let's say a national society where it's really the tribe and the clan and the nation, and then you move up into an international society where it's all about business and individuals, and then you move to a green society where it's all about more larger. It's all about it's more universal in its ideas, and you keep moving up, and then when you get to a certain level, it's called second tier. When you go above second tier, you're able to integrate the previous levels, rather than just judging the world from whatever level you're at and deciding that the people at the lower levels are bad. Sorry. Yeah. So anyway, it sounds like what you're describing is similar to this integral idea where there's like previous level integrates the previous level, and then after you get a certain point, you're able to integrate all the lower levels and understand them, and that, I guess maybe that's when you become more an individual in the sense that you're talking about.
Well,
that's a bit vague, but
if this democratic model is actually a reflection of what really is anyway, then it's then with each level, the numbers are reduced exponentially. There's a relationship of negative exponential as you go up. In other words, you can think of it the opposite way. A level 1 leader represents 10 people. A level 2 leader represents 100. A level 3 represents 1,000. Well, if you think of it in reverse, then the numbers are going down at the same rate, at the same exponential rate. And so whether, if you think about these different levels of integrating, then the people at the top are very small numbers. And then the people at the next level down are a certain exponential power, they're whatever, and it keeps going up. The number of people at every given level keeps going up exponentially.
Well, how do you avoid that becoming a stratified kind of medieval kind of society?
Democracy.
What? Democracy.
Oh,
the voting business, the people, the fact that you have a decision in who's the leader and stuff, and
new people every election. You're sending up new people every election.
Right.
But the thing is,
there's movement through the hierarchy. It's not stuck, static, stable, fixed world. There's always this circulation.
Yeah, and my guess, it's just a guess that the change of power would be more radical. The change of decision making, the change of ideological perspective would happen more rapidly, and it would be more dynamic. So I'm only imagining all this, of course, and so it would fix. What happens is societies entrench themselves in one way of being for too long, and then it's like turning around this massive ship, and it's just it's a huge amount of suffering. But if we're turning the ship a little bit all the time, then there's way less pain and way more benefits, it seems to me. And we address, we're much less able to ignore problems. So if you have this more dynamic electoral system, which sends up people who are better able to address the problems that we have, then it's, anyway, it was just an idea about small groups, which I thought was the solution to the collective problem of first of all identity politics, but also the idea that people are almost everybody is at the bottom of hierarchy. Or if you're a songwriter, most songwriters never sell a song. They never make a cent with their songs, and that's normal. It's not, and so how do we make it so that those hierarchies actually make sense? How do they actually provide for people, and also maximize people's potential at the bottom?
Right.
I mean, at the top, they got there because they're better at fulfilling their potential.
Probably there's too much dead weight up here. People who are just up there for no reason. They're just and then there's probably too much potential down here.
Yeah.
This seems to be the problem is that, a guy like you who writes these sublime songs, who's gonna take you on, and how to get your songs to there doesn't seem to be structures in place that, um, there are structures, but there doesn't seem to be structures that valorize quality or talent or
Well, I don't think Peterson says this really clearly, but he kind of says it. He says basically, hierarchies are inherently conservative, and so it's conscientiousness is rewarded at the higher levels of hierarchy. But the left winger is typically high in openness and low in conscientiousness, which is not particularly conducive to rising up hierarchies.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
So there's actually a fair bit of intelligence down at the bottom of hierarchies. People who are not rising up, not succeeding between, in quotes,
Yeah.
but and it's because of their temperament.
Uh-huh.
And so, in other words,
Well, it's because they can't be two things at one time. They can't be the effective, promoter, manager, and the artist at the same time. So
exactly.
you do need the group. It comes back to our discussion of groups. So you do need you do need the guy that's going to who's going to do that, who's high in conscientiousness, to help the clowns like me and you who are low in conscientiousness and high in openness, to actually find, to take that and bring it into embodied form in the world, or something like that.
No, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. So the small group brings together these different. Yeah, I never thought of that, but that's true. No, that's absolutely true. I was going to say something else.
It's the five traits thing. Just that's kind of blown my mind, because again, it's I guess it's 10. It's that number again. You said 10. There's actually two parts of every trait. There's in openness. There's the more mathematical type of openness, and the more lateral thinking type of openness, and so there's about 10 different traits maybe running around, qualities or styles of person, and if you have the right balance of all those, then you have like what you would call in Buddhism a mandala would be, with like a complete world, right? But if you have all these people in different places, sort of working their asses off, but not really succeeding because they don't have the right people around them or support, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's pretty much all I have to say about small groups. So I'd be tempted to, I have this what I consider to be a threefold theory about getting us out of our fix. Because one big fix we have is environmental,
Mm-hmm.
And the other is democratic reform, and the third, I think, is this huge fear, which may not happen, but this huge fear of mass redundancy, which is encroaching upon us. In other words, crazy numbers of people are going to be put out of work because of robotization and whatnot. And so I've been thinking that this is three sides of the exact same problem. So what I just articulated was economic democratic reform, and how small groups is a way out of that. But another idea I had, maybe I shouldn't get into it now because it's a longer journey, but
No, it's fine.
it's about what I call the reusable economy. Like in environmental lore, environmental ethics, there's the three-step process of reduce, reuse, and recycle. I'm sure you've heard that, reduce, reuse, recycle. So reducing your consumption of packaging and of stuff
Mm-hmm.
is the best thing, and reusing is the next best thing. So if you have a plastic bag, first of all, the best thing to do is to not consume plastic bags, and then the second best thing to do is to reuse your plastic bags if you are consuming them. And the third best thing, if you're not reducing and you're not reusing, is to recycle. In other words, to put them into the city recycling, where they will be turned into something else.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a standard established ethic for environmentalism. And I've been thinking about this, and I realized, well, I don't know if I realized, but I've been theorizing.
Can I stop you just for a second? there seems to be two modes of thought, right? One is extremely pessimistic, right? Where we're on the Titanic drinking our champagne and we're going to go to hell in it very soon. And then the other mode of thought is like the Steven Pinker mode of thought. It was just we're getting better and better every day, and there's less poverty and all that. Except the problem with that view is not the long view. It's like because in the long view it looks kind of catastrophic, but in the short view it seems to be everything's getting better. So I just wanted to throw that in, like so you're kind of that's kind of where you're going in terms of like
okay, well, to be
deal with that
optimistic,
problem.
the idea, I mean, the great technological revolution, which has made us rich and is making the whole world rich really fast, is arguably it's just a learning. It may be just a learning process. It might take 50 years. Maybe it'll take 100 years, and then we'll figure it out how to live alongside nature and allow nature to thrive. How to not be rendering species extinct, at the crazy rate that we're doing. And we could probably figure that out over time. And it's all brand new. In other words, we're new to this, and so we haven't got a clue what it's about really, but we're learning very, very quickly. So there's a very optimistic argument that this is just going to work itself out in time, just because we're busy working it out. Yeah. And so there's lots of reason for optimism, I think. Now that doesn't mean that's going to happen. It could be a disaster. But this idea of mine about environmentalism, and I don't know much about environmentalism, but I've been thinking about mass redundancy. Here's the thing: imagine you're in a neighborhood, and in sometime in the near future, and there's a new law, not only much more than a law, a new ethic is deeply in place in your neighborhood, and this is the ethic. No garbage is allowed ever to leave your neighborhood. Mm-hmm. Imagine all the garbage that gets put out once a week on the street and gets picked up. Yeah. That includes sewage, by the way. Everything that gets flushed down the toilet is not allowed to leave your neighborhood. Nothing is allowed to leave. So what happens then? So what happens then is people organize in a very serious kind of way. So glass and plastic and rubber tires and car wrecks. All these type of things have to be organized, and they have to be looked at. They have to be repurposed in one form or another. And I'm interested in the idea that this in and of itself may be the solution to our problem of mass redundancy, because we produce so much shit. It's crazy how much garbage.
Just the work of recycling our stuff.
Yeah, well, we're forced to repurpose it in our own neighborhood. It's very easy for me to imagine all this garbage being used to build houses. It's not a difficult thing to imagine. No. But not only that, your car engines can be used to run all kinds of mills. You can do all kinds of stuff. I'm imagining in my head the return to an old neighborhood trade type thing with seamstresses repurposing clothing and tailors and whatnot, and blacksmiths and melting down metals and people taking windows from houses that are being torn down.
Isn't that like what people do in the favelas in Brazil in some way? Like, how are we going to do that with our types of lifestyles that we have? I mean,
it would one way to do it, and this is the right wing's proud of me, one way to do it is to have something like a 30-year plan where people know that gradually over a 30-year period, we will completely and utterly eliminate all forms of social welfare. And that means no monetary social assistance, no employment insurance, no workers' compensation, no low-income housing for those who need it. And so they know that this process is in place, and they're going to have to spend the next 30 years learning how to repurpose every single item of waste so as to make a living. And I'm convinced
that's kind of different than a bit different than the what's it called, the guaranteed income that people are
Oh no, I was thinking a lot about guaranteed income, and I was attracted to it for a while, and then I began to think of it as hell on earth. We're just going to become we're going to become something very undesirable, or at least we may. And you
Well,
know,
we
maybe
already have become something quite undesirable, haven't we? In some sense, like.
I've been listening to, paying attention to, I don't know if you've heard of the black conservative thinker Thomas Sowell. If you
Yeah,
haven't,
right. Yeah, I have a little bit.
we talked about this a little bit, that the introduction of social welfare in the 1960s had a very negative impact on Black America. They were basically progressing in a fairly organic way through in the first half of the 20th century, and the introduction, what was known as the war on poverty, basically set them back, in his opinion, and turned them into it turned the Black American identity into something, you know, like welfare recipients, which they were not, and it was unintentional, and it basically cloistered them in a certain pocket of society where they had not been before.
Right.
That's only one side of the argument. I mean, it just seems to me that
So that's the argument, like when your best intentions create a hell on earth or something. You're trying to make everybody happy, create a hell. You take away their sense of responsibility or you know.
Thomas Sowell has a really interesting argument. He basically said that in the late 19th century, there were very, very deliberate policies put in place, very deliberately racist policies put in place in the American South to keep Black people down, and it was deliberate, and there was no hiding it. It was explicitly racist, and it didn't work. He showed that the Black American people, they actually did fairly well. They prospered during that period, and they did fairly well, and they progressively did well right through the 20th century until, in his view, until the war on poverty. And so, in other words, there was a deliberately racist policy was put in place to deliberately keep Black people down. It had, in his opinion, possibly the reverse effect. And then in the 1960s, there was a deliberate effort to mitigate racism and to improve the lives of those considered to be the poorest
It
people.
also had a negative effect.
Had the reverse effect in his view. So he's basically saying social policy does not have what we intended to have. And so beware of social, which is why he became a conservative, I think, was part of why he became a conservative.
Well, this may be something that I've been thinking about. I've been thinking about conservatism, right? And it seems that the most intelligent view is that, on one hand, very progressive and very conservative at the same time. I was thinking of musicians who are good, right? And they always have a attachment to tradition in some kind of a way, but also they're also way in the future in some kind of way, you know, like William Blake, or even Bob Dylan he's a traditionalist. Like he's always, and he does the most radical things. So the most radical thing is it's like this, I don't know, a double arrow thing of looking forward and looking back at the same time. You're very aware of the tradition, but at the same time you can see beyond it or something like that.
I totally agree. Completely agree.
So I was always very negative about conservatism somehow, and somehow I'm understanding it more. It's because progressives tend to run away with everything, and they end up making everything worse they end up making a hell of their best intentions.
Well, the very basic principle of conservatism, I think, was articulated by Sir Edmund Burke. I've never read him, but he's been explained to me, which was that it was basically this: be careful when you go about changing things, because you may see all these problems, but that doesn't mean you may see how things are not working. Mm-hmm. It may be clear to you how things are not working, but it may not be one bit clear to you how things are actually working. So there might be all these dimensions that you don't see, and things work. And when things are working well, you don't recognize it because it's working. Yeah. It's really only when you don't think about your knee until your knee starts to hurt you. You know, you start to get arthritis in your knee or something. Then you think about it all the time. Yeah. And so all these things that are working, so if you're going to go about changing society, then you have to you better damn well be open to the fact that you might make it a hell of a lot worse. And that's basically the basic principle of conservatism. Don't change what works. But the problem is, quite often we don't know what works. We don't know something that.
Yeah, well, yeah, that just keeps us stuck in some kind of mode. Whereas, we also always have to jump out into the unknown and experiment or learn. I guess it's just where you put the parameters.
Yeah. I've been thinking that I hate the word progressive. It's a self-flattering word to be a progressive. I think the real word for left-wing people is experimental. So the opposite of conservatism is experimentalism. So I think it would be a good idea if we change the term, the dichotomy, the political dichotomy between in that way. We call conservatism. Conservatism makes perfect sense. The other side is experimentalism. You don't know what you're doing.
Was that liberal? Is that what you would call liberal? Is that the wrong thing too?
I don't like the word liberal. I think the word liberal really belongs in the center. I don't like the way in the United States, for example, they have this division between conservatives and liberals. Now, the word liberal does mean freedom, right? It means free. So when you're free to try stuff. You're free to do stuff. I suppose there's a sense in which there's a bit of overlap there. But I think it would be more technically correct to call a left-winger an experimentalist.
An experimenter. It doesn't work. You have to think of something else. It's not punchy enough. An experimenter. Okay. It won't stick. It doesn't stick until it has this resonance. A new name for the left project.
In the U.S., a liberal means a left winger, but that's only in the U.S. In Canada, it technically means a centrist, and in Europe.
Right. In Canada, it means a centrist. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's confusing. But anyway, so back to the reusable thing. It seems to me that all of these products, all kinds of products, clothing, if you tear down a house, all this wood that's in the house and the siding, the tin cans, all this stuff, we've gone through this great effort to take it out of the ground or harvest it from the trees or take it out of the ocean, and we've transformed it into all these products. Yeah. And then we just throw it away, or we give it to charity or something. Apparently 75% of clothing that goes to a charitable clothing stores, they don't get used as clothing in the stores. They don't get sold. So in other words, it makes way more sense to take the big pile of clothing that gets produced in a neighborhood on a fairly regular basis and to repurpose it in one form or another. It can be repurposed in all kinds of ways. So I guess my point is, you have this many-step process before a product ends up on the shelf and we buy it. But all you're doing when you're repurposing a product is going back one step. So this great effort, this great process of taking it out of the ground or harvesting it or whatever and putting it in a factory where it gets transformed in something, then the packaging, all of this difficult capitalist process is done for us. And all we do is go back one step, and in a sense, we remanufacture what all this waste that we have. So in a way that's sort of beginning to happen, isn't it? Maybe, yeah. I mean, I'll put it this way. I don't think in very small and rather token ways, but I don't think recycling makes sense. Recycling to me is very expensive and very energy, and it consumes an enormous amount of energy for what it does. Cars get crushed down and smelted and stuff. Now, maybe that makes sense. Maybe I'm wrong. And all the packaging, our cereal boxes and stuff, they just get crushed down and recycled and something. It seems to me that we could be more intelligent with the way we use this stuff. And not only that, it could potentially provide a livelihood for the bottom base of our society. In other words, you're talking about an urbane return to something like a subsistence economy, except you're using the leftovers of capitalism in order to do so. Now, I know that in poor countries, they do this anyway, but you could be more organized. The government could be involved so as to create a more sensible infrastructure so as to encourage this, right? Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's just an idea. So there's my big ideas there. They're kind of big ideas. So we've managed to repurpose democracy and work, I think. Yeah, redefine democratic reform, figuring out ways to make the bottom of our society more viable without looking for handouts. So in other words, this makes perfect sense. And also eliminates the negativity of the social welfare society, all the, the various handouts that come with it.
Yeah. Well, again, I don't know. I guess Peter, we talk probably too much about Jordan Peterson, but this shift from a rights, this is my right to this and this and this, it's like an adolescent, like an adolescent society, right? Who demands rights from everything and won't give back, right? So then discovering that what people at the bottom, what people who are in hell or in bad shape or or just in poverty, what might bring them back would be, some sense of responsibility. But then the tricky thing is, how do you do that without just hurting them into some kind of, more and more of these, programs to fix people or.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that attracts me about this reusable economy idea is it's kind of free. People are left alone. You're not telling them what to do. You just you do. There is a vision, a larger structural vision, but you're not telling people what to do. You're not. There's a kind of this free. It's kind of like the bottom. It's like a subsistence capitalism. There's still, I don't know. A lot of people don't realize this, but the word capital simply means tools. That's all it means. Mm-hmm. And so one of the reasons why we think of capitalism as being centered around money is because money is such a powerful tool. Uh-huh. Basically everything we use is a tool, and everything we use is a tool of production. So if you think of a plastic bag, for example, that we repurpose, well, that's a tool. So it's the bottom of capitalism.
That's capital, then. A tool is capital.
Anything, the technical term for capital is tools of production. But when you think about that, I've thought about this, and I think that's actually a redundant term. All tools are productive, at least potentially. So the term tools of production is a redundant term. It has the same meaning twice in it. That's what redundancy means. So all tools are tools of production. So basically tools. So capitalism is an ideology which is based on tools. That's what capitalism. That's how I understand it. So, and anybody who thinks that we tools aren't what has made things really work for us, it's obviously extremely important. We're not getting around it. It's simply a part of who we are.
So we have to integrate tools, or capitalism in some sense in a society. We have to have this dynamic, creative force. Without it being run by gangsters or.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a sort of a. Anyway, that's a simple way of talking about it.
Well, I'm thinking the bottom of. I mean, we're going a bit too far now, I think. But I think the bottom of my vision of the bottom of all economics is subsistence. In other words, it's not very monetary. It might be a little bit monetary, but it's not very. At the very bottom of, like, for example, when you live in your house, you don't pay someone to wash your dishes. You wash your own dishes. And that means you're doing work for which you don't get paid. And you're doing work which does not entail the exchange of money. And so that's the very base of our economic.
Looking after children or.
At the very base of our economic lives, an enormous amount of work is done without the exchange of money. And that's arguably the most important economic work. And it's just, to me, I think that it's only when you start to rise up in the hierarchy of economics that money gets involved. And at the bottom, there's all this work that's being done, which it's totally non-monetary. And that's, I call that subsistence economy. In other words, my definition of subsistence economy is economics which does not entail monetary exchange. So if you think about this repurposing idea, this reusable idea, then you're engaged in an extremely dynamic. Everybody's doing it, and if we're highly organized in neighborhoods, so that, for example, the cardboard goes in this big slot, and the wood, the lumber goes here, the car tires go here, the heavy metals go there, the windows go here, and the glass, and all of this, absolutely every scrap of it is necessarily reused because it's not allowed to leave the neighborhood. Although it'll just pile up there unless you reuse it. So people figure out ways to do it. They make foundations, they build houses, they use car windows to put windows in their houses. They do all kinds of things. They build their houses for free. They figure out ways to build greenhouses. They grow their own food. In other words, this develops progressively in a manner which, and here's the environmental side of all of this. There's a real big argument that the real trick to environment, to the biggest problem of us damaging the environment is containment. We throw our shit away. We push it away and let it. And so instead of containing absolutely everything and reusing it, if we contain it and reuse it, then it won't go. It's not going to affect nature, so to speak. If you know what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One idea about. Here's another idea about the future. I don't know if you've looked up indoor agriculture, high-rise farming, and stuff.
Yeah.
That's probably going to take off in the next few decades, and cities are going to
vertical farming, you mean, and things like that.
Yeah, all the food is going to be built in skyscrapers in cities, and that means that all this land that's being used for agriculture will be turned to wilderness. So the animals are going to get their habitat back, I think. And this may happen very quickly, and it may just be the free market dynamics which will.
Well, have you seen that video as when they reintroduced wolves to Yellowstone National Park? The entire, it's amazing. The entire ecosystem regenerated because of the introduction of wolves.
Oh, really?
There's this amazing video about that, and because it turns out that it's not just the plants. It's you need to have these predator animals to have a completely sound ecosystem, and anyway, I thought, yeah, that's right. So yeah, that would be the future, I think. I think this rewilding idea seems to be.
Yeah. No, I think that's going to happen.
Seems to be important.
Yeah. No, I'm optimistic about all that stuff. But I do think I'm really scared about mass redundancy, about the fact that people feel not only that they don't have work, but they have meaningless work.
That's Well, I mean, the optimistic thing is the meaningless jobs will go away, right? Because there's all these people in China who are working for Foxconn, and they had to build a net around the building because they were committing suicide. I mean, imagine the work conditions there. And then the guy replaces them with robots, and the robots, do all these manual jobs. They were getting crippled, but then they don't have jobs. So what are all these hordes of people, going to do precisely?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's the question.
What kind of work was that? What
was putting together computers and iPhones and that sort of thing. And they had these people living in these little dormitories with 10 people. And, again, the company built a net around because people were jumping out the window. So that's just like, okay, then so the robots, the guy says, oh, we're going to replace that with robots. Well, that's nice, but then all these people are going to be out of a job. So you're fucked either way. What are people going to do? Yeah, I don't know. I've heard statistics like 90, even the engineer jobs that people are studying for right now, like are going to be done by algorithms. But so what the hell are people going to do? Like, take acid or go to Burning Man festivals, or I don't know what they're going to do.
Yeah, I'm inclined to think
a society of leisure, or it's not likely, because people need challenge and difficulty, struggle to become.
Anyway, that's my. So you're repurposing shit all the time, and then the more people become unemployed, the more they end up in the repurposing economy, so to speak, including food and the use of sewage to create compost, so it's growth, etc. And so there's this real. Anyway, I kind of feel that neighborhoods could once again become micro-regional as a result, and extremely beautiful, because people are crafting their neighborhoods in a much more individual way because of everything they're doing with all the shit that they have to deal with. That's kind of a little vision. Anyway, I think that's pretty much all I got to say, Andrew.
Okay.
You got something to say?